Look, I know you've already achieved unheard of levels of success as an entrepreneur. So the real question is, while the world is radically shifting, how do we not get caught up in the chaos, but instead access our untapped capacity? You know what I'm talking about. I'm Katie Richardson, business coach to superstar entrepreneurs and host of What's Working Now. I'm here to show you how to unlock and magnify your untapped potential so that we can create the dream, live with purpose, and do what we are born to do. On this podcast, we are asking a different set of questions. Be present, be curious, be right now. Let's go. Hit that subscribe button and go to what'sworkingnow.com, drop in your email, join the waitlist so you never miss an episode of What's Working Now. And I'll see you on the inside.
Hello, welcome to What's Working Now. I am your host, Katie Richardson. We have a negotiating expert zooming in from London, and I'm super excited for you guys to meet him. We've just been chatting, and I'm already excited to hear his 4-part process. So if you have struggled at all with negotiating, and Mike tells me that like 99.9% of people do struggle, and it's just not natural for most individuals. And so he's got a 4-part framework he's going to share with us today. So Mike Lander is a successful entrepreneur, ex-procurement director, an expert negotiator, according to his clients, which is key, by the way. He's raised over 6.5 million pounds of acquisition growth capital in his career and grown companies to over 20 million revenue and 4 million EBITDA. He's also negotiated hundreds of deals as a buyer worth over 470 million pounds in total. Mike Lander, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and I really want to get a sense for your unique perspective. And so tell us the story of an experience that has radically formed and shaped how you view the world today.
So I'll give you a snapshot of where I am now, and then I'm going to take you back to kind of the very early years. So as you've just said, I'm very fortunate. I've run some decent sized companies, and I've borrowed significant amounts of debt, and I've grown companies and turned them around and sold them. And if people measure success like that, then I've been successful. I think there's a whole different topic, Katie, about what does success really mean? And do you measure yourself against others or against yourself? That's a different topic. Anyway, if you go back to when I was adopted as a child. So 0 to 6 months, I was fostered. And then at 6 months old, I was adopted. Okay. And it doesn't shape your life, but it has an impact on your life for sure, which kind of carries on with you forever, really. Very lucky. I had very good adoptive parents, very fortunate. Go to 16. So would you say right now, so just before we do 16, how would you kind of describe me? We hardly know each other, Katie, but in terms of just how I come across, how do I come across now, broadly?
So easy to talk to, warm, friendly, inviting, very conversational, natural, easy to talk to.
16 years old, massively lacked confidence, failing at school by school standards, definitely failing at school by school standards. Very, very shy, very, very, very quiet as a person. Didn't have any mentors around me at 16 who could stretch me and could help me see a different world. So lovely parents, loving parents, both of them. Sadly, now both of them died, but loving parents. And our peer group, they were both administrators in life. And that's not a judgment. That's a statement. They were administrators. That's what they did for a living. And they worked hard and provided a great family environment. But it meant that their friends were also administrators, or they were, in one case, a scrapyard dealer who was tough as old boots, really, really tough as old boots. You wouldn't mess with George, ever. I'm sure George was a good negotiator, sold scrap metal. And so we didn't have entrepreneurs in our life apart from George. He was the only one. So we didn't have accountants in our lives, didn't have lawyers, didn't have doctors, no one. And that had quite a big impact on me. And I think it has a big impact on other young people, where you need to have people around you who can help mentor you. So 16 years old, very shy, lacked confidence. knew I wanted to be an engineer at that point, liked fixing things. I liked fixing cars. So I went for engineering jobs, left school at 16 and went to go and do an apprenticeship. And one day I was sat in someone's office who was the apprentice manager at a company in Stockport, which is in the northwest of England, on a pretty miserable day. I'd done my GCSEs and CSEs and got bad results. Having the interview, he said to me, Mike, we don't think you'll be an apprentice. You're not bright enough. We don't even think you'll be on our craft program. Don't think you're very capable. We can probably get you to sweep the floor.
Wow.
You might make something, but you might, but you know, from what I see now, I don't think you will. And in that moment, you have to make a decision as a human being. I can accept this and accept that's going to be my life, or I can do something about it. And luckily, I decided to do something about it. I thought there must be more to life than this, surely.
Wow. Yeah.
And I got a breakthrough. And one of our family friends, who happened to be a teacher, he was one of the very few people we had that were so-called professionals, and he helped. And Eric Dearman, sadly passed away many, many years ago, helped get me into a company and helped get me into college. And then you go forward, I'm now 58. So you go forward 42 years and this is who I am now.
Yeah. Mike, in that moment, you made a decision which ultimately led you to creating yourself. Like up until then, you kind of had lived the default.
Correct.
Right. And then you intentionally said, hold on a second, I actually am in the driver's seat here.
Yeah. I get to decide.
Yeah. And when somebody makes that shift, it's like the people start to show up. And it sounds like that's what your experience was.
Correct.
That's amazing.
The right people show up and they see someone that needs help. And they go, and some of the right people say, I'll help you. And that's big lesson in life to anyone that's listening on your show. Yeah. Just find the right people, show up with an idea of what you want to do. Don't just rock up and say, help me. If someone came to you, Katie, from the street and said, oh, would you help me? Yeah. Well, what do you want help with? I don't know. Just make me successful. You'd be like, what? Really? What? You've not even had the gumption to work out some ideas and what your passion is. I've got this big thing. So I don't know where this is going to go, Katie. Who knows? It's a conversation.
Let's do it.
Big thing about education. I don't know what it's like in the States. I'd like to get your insights in the US system. But in the UK, my view is, so we have a son, he's 10 years old. And I've always said to my wife, I think one of the biggest things we can do for our son is help him find his passion. If we can help him find what he's really good at and he loves, and as long as the education system is broadly flexible enough to let him move around inside the box, he'll be fine in life. And I think there's this big problem, certainly in the UK, whereby the child has to fit the system. Yes. Whereas I believe the system should flex to the child.
Love that. Yes, 100%. We, just for a little bit of background, I've got 4 kids and 3 of them are teenagers, and they homeschool for that very reason. We just felt frustrated. Yeah.
Good for you. Wow, that's a journey. My word.
It is a journey. It's a journey. Yeah, but let's keep going because this is so good, Mike. Love how you're talking about that moment that you put yourself in the driver's seat, and then like you ask, if somebody came off the street and said, Katie, help me. My first question to that person always is, what do you want?
Yeah.
And to your point, like you were talking about, figuring that out. And if you don't know what you want, then nobody can help you. Correct. No expert in any field can help you until you've decided what it is that you want. So you at some point started to figure out that you wanted, I don't know that you even necessarily decided that you wanted to be an expert negotiator, but you became one. You definitely became one.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting as well about when, as you say, when people work out what they want, what I'd worked out at 16 was I wanted to be an engineer because I liked making things work. I liked taking them apart and making things work.
Yeah.
And that took me on a journey for quite a while, up until I was about 30. And during those kind of 14 years of working and studying, and I ended up getting a degree because I worked for 5 years and then went to university and got my degree, and then worked again, and then left and did my master's degree because I was fascinated by learning, and I've always thought being a lifelong learner is a good thing to be. And again, I think one of my takeaways for your audience is you pick a destination of some kind at a stage in your life, and then you go on that journey. That doesn't mean that's where you'll be forever, but you have to have some sense of direction, or else you're just going to drift.
Yeah.
And so I picked this direction of engineering, and it worked out really well for me. And then an interesting thing happened over that kind of 14-year period, which was, and I think it's partly driven by being adopted. I don't think this is a common trait with all adopted people. But one thing that I certainly felt was financial independence becomes really important to you, because I had a feeling that ultimately it was just down to me. So if everyone else wasn't going to help me financially, I had to help myself and create enough financial support so that I and now my family will be okay independently. Yeah. And that stuck with me. Having enough financial wealth, whatever that means, wealth, to allow us to live a life that is the life that we want became very important. What happened in the 14 years was I started to realize that being an engineer was great and I enjoyed it. I was okay at it, Katie. I wasn't a brilliant engineer. If you talk to my friends, they'd all say, "You're okay, Mike, you were fine." But I wasn't a standout engineer. Okay. And I realized that. And I started going, I want to run a business. What's this business thing? I want to run a business. I've seen all these people doing things, and I think I'd like to run a business. And then I realized I know nothing about finance, zero. So another takeaway for your audience is if you're running a business as an entrepreneur and you don't understand finance, go and learn. Go and find out. Read the books, find out what a P&L is, a balance sheet, and a cash flow. Because if you don't know that, you will not be a successful entrepreneur. It will not work. It cannot work. Yeah. And I thought, how do I find that out? And then I worked out, I'll do an MBA. I did an MBA in the UK. I learned all these amazing finance and strategy skills that I didn't have before. And then went on the next stage of my journey. But those finance skills became really, really important throughout the rest of my business life, as they are now.
Wow. So, Mike, when you went and got your MBA, how old were you?
So I was 29.
Wow. So many people at that point would be like, I missed my chance.
Not at all. Never too late.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever too late.
Never too late. That's definitely something that's showing up for me as you tell your stories. So you went and got an MBA, dove into finance, learned it, and it's become the foundation for everything that you've done from that point on. Yeah. So you have developed this strategy for negotiating that can take somebody who's not a natural. Yep. And it can give them the framework that they need to be able to negotiate. And the interesting thing about negotiation is it's not a logical thing always. Right. You're in that conversation and both parties have so much emotion coursing through their veins. And so having a simple 4-step process, I don't know it by the way, to the audience, I don't know it yet. I don't know Mike's process, and I'm excited to learn it because personally, I've experienced that. You're there, you want that deal more than anything, but then you have to talk yourself off wanting it and be willing to walk away. And so I'm really curious to hear this process and maybe tell us a little bit about how you kind of discovered it.
So let's unpack a few myths, first of all. So let's say we were having dinner with some business friends, Katie, and we were talking around the table and people were saying, wow, I saw this amazing business person of the day. They were doing a negotiation. They were just a natural. I could never be like them. I could never negotiate like them. It's complete nonsense. It's BS. It's complete nonsense. Negotiators are not born. They can be trained. Some people happen to be very natural negotiators. And there are some big names out there that I won't mention the names of, but they're deemed to be brilliant negotiators. I'd question whether they are, but they're deemed to be. But some people happen to be natural, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
But anyone can learn to negotiate. So that's myth number one.
Okay.
Myth number two is it's all about preparing your mind on the day in the negotiation, ready for meeting Katie and having this negotiation. That's also a myth. It's important that you prepare your mind, but 80% of the value of any negotiation is in the preparation.
Okay.
80%. So if you prepare well, you get a pen and you sit down and you use this 4-step framework. Even if you prepare 15 minutes before, it's better than nothing. Ideally, most negotiations that I do that are of a decent size, $500,000 or something more that I'm helping a client with, there's probably half a day's prep in that as a minimum before the first meeting, probably something like that.
Okay.
So that's kind of myth number two. So let's get into the framework about how this framework can help people negotiate better deals every time and get better outcomes. So I'll go through the 4 steps first, just as the steps, and then I'll unpick each of the steps a little bit so that people can actually sort of write it down. So if you're listening, don't do it in the car, clearly. Katie's got a pen.
I do.
Replay the episode at home.
Right now.
So the 4 steps are this. Step number 1, what's the background and the context to the deal? And as I said, I'll unpack these in a second. So step number 1, write down the context and the background to the deal.
Okay.
Step number 2, what process are you going to use and what are the timescales for negotiating the deal?
Okay.
Step 3, write down all the things you're going to negotiate around, what I call the negotiation variables. There are probably in any one deal 4 to 6 things. And I'll come back to what they are in a second. And then the last thing is, write down on a sheet what the problems are, what the issues are, and then work through them with actions. So 4 simple steps. And when you've done those and written your things down, you're then prepared for the actual meeting. So step 1, what does the context of the background to the deal mean? Well, what are your objectives? And what are the other side's objectives? People say, well, I don't know what their objectives are. Well, maybe you should find out before you negotiate with them. So write down your objectives, write down theirs. When you've written the objectives down, write down what your interests are. What are your motivations? Objectives are quite rational. Motivations are often the underlying interests, the motivations behind doing this deal. So you've got 2 or 3 things in your mind probably about deals you've done. The other party's got the same. Write them down. BATNAs. So this is a technical negotiating term. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is really important. Look it up online. William Ury at Harvard developed it, and Roger Fisher in a book called Getting to Yes, which is a great negotiating book. BATNA is all about, if we're negotiating a deal and I don't like the way the deal's turning out, you have to have a strong alternative to this deal. You have to be able to close your book and say, thanks, this isn't for me. I've got other options. If you walk into a negotiation, this is the only game in town, and it's win or lose. I will see it as a buyer. I will break that down and I'll get the best deal for me, and you'll end up with a really bad deal. You've got to have alternatives when you're negotiating a deal. And then, simple thing, 2 last things on this context.
Okay.
Who's involved from their side? Who are the stakeholders, the technical term? Who's involved on the other side? Because it's not just one person. There might be 3 or 4 people. Or they might all have different agendas. Do you know who they are? Have you researched them? Have you looked them up? Have you tried talking to them? And then the other thing that I recommend to everyone is, so let's say you're doing a deal and you're doing step one, you write it down and you're prepared and it's going well, Katie. You've written down some things, you know the objectives, you've got some motivations. Sit down with a couple of your business colleagues who don't know about this deal and say, have you got 20 minutes for me? And they'll say, yeah, fine. Okay, 20 minutes, Katie. What do you need? Think of all the worst questions they could possibly ask, or the worst things that could happen. What's the worst thing they could do in this negotiation when I'm meeting them? Brainstorm the worst things and then write down how you respond. That does two things. You've thought through them probably 90% of the worst things that could happen. And secondly, it's calmed the anxious mind.
Yes. Yeah. Which can hijack you in a negotiation.
Anxiety will hijack you in a negotiation. Yes. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we've got the basics in place. That's step one. Step two, the timescales and the process. So basically, look, there are kind of write down, I think there are 3 steps in this process. We're going to meet them first of all, and we're going to discuss the basic topic of the negotiation. That's probably going to end up in, there's a bit of rethinking required. So that's step 2. We're going to go away and do some rethinking. Then we're going to go back to the table. We're going to then get to the point of going, oh, there's some term sheets or there's some schedules need developing. And then the 4th one is we're going to get contracts. So there's probably 4 basic bits in your process. And then you go, well, how long is it going to take? And you think, blah, I don't know, 8 weeks. Okay. So maybe there's a milestone every 2 weeks. When you've written it down, send it to your counterparty and say to them, I think there's 4 basic steps in this negotiation. I think it will take us 8 weeks and it's 2-week milestones. What do you think? If they write back and go, you are really sadly mistaken, Katie. You've misread the situation quite badly. This is a 24-week negotiation. Our lawyers are going to take 16 weeks. Then at least you know what the expectations are, about how long it's going to take.
Yeah, so good.
So that's step 2.
Okay.
Step 3. Everyone wants to do step 3 first. Don't. Do step 1, do step 2, then do step 3. Write down what your variables are for the negotiation. For example, everyone says, well, it's price. I'm like, yeah, it's definitely price. But the price is attached to a scope. So what's the scope of the negotiation? What's in and what's out?
Yeah.
There's the length of the contract. There'll be a contract of some kind. How long is it going to last for? That's a variable. Termination rights. How many times, Katie, in negotiations, have you been going through the negotiations and then someone says, yeah, just to remind you, Katie, there's a termination at will clause in the contract. And you go, what does that mean? And they say, well, I can terminate the contract anytime I like. And you go, but it's a 3-year deal. And they go, yeah, it is, Katie. It is. It's a 3-year deal. But if I choose to, I can just cut you off at the knees anytime I like.
Right.
It's not a 3-year deal at all.
No.
It's a 14-day deal.
Yeah.
So that becomes an important element. Intellectual property, who owns the IP?
Yeah.
So there's 4 or 5 things there as basic things. And if you say to me, let's say you're negotiating with me and I put a price forward, this service is $100,000. We've defined what the service is. And you go, Mike, great, back end of the deal. Typical the last minute chipper technique. You go, Mike, I'm busy. I've got a plane to catch. It's a good deal. I think we're okay. But 75,000 and I could sign before I get my plane. But I'm busy for the next 2 months. That's just a chip. I'd say, Katie, that's brilliant. Which bit of my scope do you want to knock out to get to 75,000? Looks like your budget's been reduced. I'm not discounting for anyone without something in exchange.
Nice. Yeah.
So then you've got, that's at step 3. Step 4, which is the issues tracker. Every deal's got problems. Every deal has a problem. Well, just write down on a bit of paper, your step 4 prep. Well, what are the current issues that we've got? What are the current problems that are either being said or not said? Just write them down and then work out, well, who's got the problem? Is it me or is it them? So it's me. Okay. So what we're going to do about it, how do I address that problem? So I can head it off with them before we get into a difficult problem in the negotiation. And And then so you've got your 4 steps all prepped, you've written it all down. You go to the meeting and everything gets thrown up in the air. You've forgotten about some stuff. Some stuff's landed well, some stuff's new. And you go, okay, I'll come back to you. You go back, you get your 4 steps out and you redo them with the new information that you've found. And you correct what you got wrong. And then you go back to the table and you iterate. And that's it.
So good.
Anyone can do it. If I can do it, anyone can do it.
100%. What's so fascinating to me, Mike, is so before you and I started recording this podcast, I told you a little bit of my history and how, my background is product design. And yet I started a brand and a company in manufacturing goods and services, shipping them all over the world, which meant I was like thrust into negotiations and sales. And I ended up being really good at it. And it was kind of baffling to me because it seemed a little bit natural and intuitive. And as you explain this 4-step process, Mike, what I was doing was honestly a lot of these elements because it's very similar to my design process.
Right.
Which is interesting. It was just, that's really fascinating. That's so fascinating. It's about being able to problem solve when there's so much complexity and dimension there's so many different variables. And like, for example, write down negotiation variables in the design world. That's called the constraints. Like you have to acknowledge the constraints.
Correct.
This is so cool. This is so cool.
That's right.
And to your point, this is something that anybody can learn. And certainly it would take some practice.
Yeah.
And, the cool thing about this is like your 4-step process, it's having them, in a sense, go through this negotiation in their mind over and over and over again to the point that you've already created it.
Exactly right.
Right? It doesn't exist yet in reality. You haven't had the conversation yet with them, but you've created it in your mind and even confronted the potential fear and anxiety that your body's going to feel when your mind gets triggered. And you've addressed that and you've been able to calm yourself down and realize, oh, that isn't actually something to get anxious about because of X, Y, and Z. We have other options.
And we've thought about it. So let's get the shovel out and dig a little bit deeper. So pick one thing.
I love that.
One thing. So the variables. So let's say you've got price and scope and length of contract. There's 3 variables. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So the next bit of the next layer of the onion, as it were, when you're writing that down and you've written them down, it's like I've got 3 variables. On a bit of paper, you've got these 3 variables. Draw 2 columns.
Okay.
The first column is what's my least acceptable outcome? What's the what's the red line? At what point do I go no? And on the right-hand side column, write out what's my best outcome, the best realistic outcome. It can't be wild and crazy and nuts. It's got to be realistic and grounded. So what's my best outcome? What's my least acceptable outcome? Now you've got 3 variables. I'm not an audio engineer, but if you were an audio engineer and you had a deck, you'd have little dials. So as one dial gets turned down as you're mixing the sound, one dial normally gets turned up. So if your price starts to move down, well, your scope has to change as well. So maybe price goes down, the scope goes down, but maybe the contract term goes up. So you start trading variables between one thing and the other. And now you know what your limits are. And then you can go, actually, Katie, this deal's not for me. You've reached my limits. I'm done.
Yes.
I'm getting out now. I'm going to get a cab. And then you might go, but just before you leave, Mike, just when I said this, actually, maybe there's a bit of flex there. Maybe we could do something different. And you get drawn back to the table because you've realized I'm really well prepared. And you wouldn't waste your time in a 1-hour meeting with me if you didn't want to work with me. You wouldn't bother.
Yeah.
So now you're going to lose something by not doing a deal. And you might be inclined to say, let's have a coffee. Come and have a water and a coffee. And then we'll come and sit down again. just talk to me about what's this thing? Why have you reached the end stop? What's the problem?
Yeah.
And I'll talk about it.
Yeah. Mike, one of the things that you're utilizing that is so effective that I want to call out here is like when the person was walking away, you're not getting defensive. You're not blaming. You're utilizing what I would call curiosity.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful tool in negotiating because it's so neutralized. It's not polarizing.
No. So something else, as we get the shovel out, we start digging around for bits of gold, tiny specks of gold about negotiating. Another little bit of gold is, and a friend of mine, a New Zealander, really good friend of mine years ago taught me this. He said, Mike, his name's Matthew. He said, Mike, the moment that you're emotionally wedded to the outcome in a deal is the moment you've lost the deal.
Yeah,
you're done.
The moment of death. It is.
The moment of death, you're done.
Yeah.
So if we unpack that, in fact, Katie, why don't you unpack that because you've recognized it, you were laughing, so you know what it means.
What's interesting is I really liked how you said it. Normally people say you have to be willing to walk away, and that doesn't address the emotional desperation and need for that deal. And how you said it was you have to identify that you have other options that are better than potentially this deal that didn't go the way that you wanted. And that then addresses the emotions. And that's why that was so brilliant. Being willing to walk away doesn't address the emotions, and people are emotional creatures, and they will still plow forward because they're needy and desperate of it. And if you can let go of your neediness and desperation and be genuinely looking to solve their problem and your problem and do it in a way that aligns and it makes sense for both of you, then everyone's going to want to sign the deal.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
And your 4-part process helps us identify all of the constraints and the variables and the needs, not only of you, but of them. And so often people are only focused on what they want. And who wants to sign that deal where you get everything you want and I get screwed? Nobody wants to sign that deal.
No, nobody.
Yeah. Yeah. And
so how do we make the deal bigger? So Katie, here's another thing.
How do we make the deal bigger? Yes, please, Mike, keep going.
Another kind of shovel in the ground. I found another small nugget. They're only tiny ones, Katie, but tiny nuggets build up to being worth something.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is not I never claim that this is my work. The 4-step process is, but that's an amalgamation of lots of learning from loads of great people and great books. And again, I think I was on the Harvard program years ago. I went on an executive negotiation program about 15 years ago at Harvard. It was brilliant. It was amazing. And one of the things they talk about there is about how do you make the pie bigger for everyone.
Nice.
So we're doing a deal, and we've got in our mind. So I've guessed your objectives, and then I've checked them out in the meetings, and they're broadly right, but they're a bit wrong. So I've tuned them, and we're starting to fight a little bit around the kind of this thing that we're trying to negotiate, and it's got a certain shape. It's a box, and it's about this big. And I'm like, well, that's great, and we might be able to get a deal done. And you're like, well, that's fine. If we get a deal done like that, then it'll work. And then I go, Katie, just let's put that to one side for a second. And you're like, right. And I'm like, if you look at your business priorities for the next 12 months, what are your priorities? Just in the round, in the big picture in the round.
Yeah.
And you go, why? And I'm like, well, if I can understand your business priorities at a bit of a higher level, there might be things I can do to help you achieve those priorities at in a cost-effective way that makes the deal bigger for me and makes it more valuable for you. Would that be interesting? You're not likely to say no. Yeah. You're likely to say yes. Yeah. So you start telling me about your priorities. And then I go, what are the challenges you've got within those priorities that are stopping you from getting there now? And you tell me. And of the 3 or 4 challenges you've got, I say, that one, I can help with that one. So we can take this deal we've got, and if I link it to that challenge and we bring in the services and some partners I've got, I think we can solve that for you within 3 months, not within 12 months. Would that help?
Wow. So good. So good.
Just simple problem solving techniques, asking the question and then being a creative. You talked about creativity and about the inquiring mind. having an inquiring mind in a deal is really powerful. But you've got to earn the trust of your counterparty to allow you to get to that point, which is why you negotiate the base deal first.
Okay.
You then get in the striking zone, and then you start saying, in my view, what else is there? Because now you've built a bit of trust with me.
Okay.
If I walked in on day one and said to you, Katie, this is brilliant, got this deal, this opportunity, I've done my prep. Now then, just tell me about your priorities, what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
How does that feel?
No, their walls are up big time. Yeah,
exactly.
Red lights flashing everywhere. Yeah.
Because you don't trust me yet, because you don't know me. What do you think, Katie?
Mike, so good. So good. I love this. It is important to understand how to sequence things. And to your point, we're sequencing it this way because we're building trust. We're creating rapport.
That's right.
We're acknowledging alignment in the deal, and it gets deeper and deeper the more we talk.
Yeah.
And then, that's so good.
And you might say to me, you might say, actually, I'm not ready for that yet. And I'm saying, that's okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's get this deal done if we can, in the way that we can do it now. We can come back to the other stuff later.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out that you did so eloquently was when it got to that point and you said, if there was a way where it could become more valuable to you and I could help you even more, would you be interested in that? Like that question asking, an invitation is a powerful way to continue to develop that relationship. You're not forcing them.
No, something else. I've just found another small piece of gold in the ground. It's tiny, but it might be helpful. Something else.
Okay.
And I was taught this years ago when I was at KPMG. Those priorities I spoke about. So I've invited you into conversation and you've accepted the invitation. We're having a conversation about your priorities. So let's play this two ways. So the first thing I say is, Katie, I think I know your business. I think your priorities are these three. I think that one's most important. I think your biggest problem is probably that. How would you respond?
This guy doesn't know me. Who do you think you are? Yeah, no thanks. Let's
replay the conversation. Let me try it again. Katie, I'm really pleased that you've said that we could at least explore some of the bigger opportunities. Don't know where it's going to go, but let's at least explore them. Would it help if I talk about, in your industry, because we work a lot in your industry, would it help if I talk about what we find in your industry with your peers? These may not be your challenges. They may not be your priorities. But
so good.
I thought it might be useful if I could just give you our view on where we think the industry is going. Would that be helpful? How did that feel?
Mike, this is what we call in my family flanking them. Because the first one was really direct, which immediately has people bringing up walls. Whereas by showing them the examples of their peers, which obviously also relates to them, it's coming at them from the side. And
Correct.
it doesn't feel offensive, and it doesn't have them bring their walls up. And what's cool is as you do that, they then get to kind of discover the answers for themselves. And you're not forcing on. So good.
They get to discover the answer for themselves, because they'll probably stop you at some point and go, so that's interesting. So my peers have that particular challenge. Just talk to me, Mike, about that particular challenge.
Yeah.
What do they find? And I said, that's really interesting, Katie. What we found is that particular challenge has these root causes often. Mm-hmm. And these are the root causes. There are 4 of them. Do any of those resonate? And you're like, whoa, yeah. Yeah, so that one. And again, this isn't my thinking at all. There's a brilliant piece of work done by 2 guys, Matt Dixon and Brent Adamson. It was called The Challenger Sale. It's a brilliant book called The Challenger Sale. And it talks about how challenger salespeople act basically as consultants with their clients and as industry experts to help them think through difficult problems.
Yes. That's so good.
So, Katie, you're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
So do you want to draw it to a conclusion before I find any bits of iron rather than gold in the ground?
I mean, no, this is a very exciting and energizing conversation, Mike. It's really cool to hear your process. And it's interesting because you use different words and phrases. I've learned so much today. It's been really, really cool and fascinating and just exciting to meet you, to learn from you. I'm really excited to share this episode with my audience. I have all kinds of people, both clients and audience members, who are raising money either with potential investors, partners, nonprofits. Yep. And so often they'll get so close and then they can't get the check written. And I'm like, you're missing some pieces. And so I think what we talked about today is it's going to be those missing pieces that will help them get the check written so that they can continue to, make the investor their return and go do the things that they feel called to do in this world. And I'm really excited. So super appreciative that you took your time to be here today and share this process. It's really, it's founded on true principles.
Yeah.
And it's super, super powerful.
Katie, thank you. I'm really pleased that it's helped you and your audience. If that's helped, then I've done some good in the world today.
You have, Mike, because today you shared with us what's working now. So thank you. It's just been absolutely incredible. And if anybody wants to, so you'll find in the show notes both the books that Mike called out, and then where can people get a hold of you if they want to engage?
LinkedIn.
Hire you?
I'm always on LinkedIn. Look on LinkedIn or go to our website, which is piscari.com, piscari.com. It'll be in the show notes, but you can always contact us there. So yeah.
Okay.
Amazing,
Awesome.
Katie. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Mike Lander, it's been a pleasure. And for everybody listening, this is What's Working Now.
Okay, was that not amazing? What is the one takeaway that you have from today's episode? Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a rate and review. Find me on Instagram, katie.live. You can also find me on Facebook, katierichardsson.live. If you're listening to all of this and you're like, Katie, this is amazing and I want more of your help, I have an invitation for you. You have an amazing opportunity to get my help inside of your business. And it's through a challenge called #Katie's Clarity. I am going to come in, I'm going to show you how to create radical clarity. What happens when we have this radical clarity is we get unstuck and we have the vision and the visibility to identify the next step that you need to take. That's what we do inside of #Katie's Clarity. So come join me. We dropped a link for you to this challenge in the show notes. Lastly, I want to make sure you're not missing out. So go to whatsworkingnow.com, drop in your email there, and we will make sure you only get the good stuff. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next episode.